Space, the final frontier. This was the dream that led the Federation to make peace throughout the galaxy, to stand firm against all opposition, and to boldly go where no one had gone before.
This will be the fourth episode in a lengthy, multi-part retrospective exploring the different ludic genres of Star Trek video games. Those previous 3 installments provide valuable context for the discussion ahead, so I highly recommend that you watch them before proceeding with this episode. Those previous 3 episodes followed a general pattern of genres becoming increasingly more violent. The first episode was about point-and-click adventures, which often favored puzzles and abstract problem-solving over outright violence. Then we looked at shooters, which were all about character-based violence. Then we scaled up that violence to Starship Operations games, which have all of the violence of shooters, if not more, but which also start to lose the character, due to being more about the starships themselves rather than the people who crew them. When we scale up even further, we start to see a number of Star Trek games that take place on galactic scales. These are your tactical strategy and grand strategy games. But we're also going to hit a bit of an inflection point here regarding the aforementioned violence, because these games will actually start to de-emphasize violence a little bit more, in favor of things like politics, trade, exploration, and diplomacy. This seems like a much more promising set of genres for Star Trek, so let's see how it holds up to scrutiny. Among the more violent highlights of this particular set of genres are the very violent Armada games. These are real-time strategy games along the lines of StarCraft or Command & Conquer. I think I played all 3 of these games back in the day. I definitely played the first one, and probably the second, maybe the third, but I never really got very big into them. You see, I was always more of a fan of turn-based strategy games like Civilization than of the real-time games like StarCraft. I don't like the games that are all about, like, clicks per minute or whatever. I prefer games like Civilization that give me an opportunity to, like, sit and think about what I'm gonna do. Heck, even when I play Total War games, I will, like, pause the real-time strategy often so that I can, like, think about what commands I want to issue next. Some people might call that cheating, but, you know, whatever. It's how I like to play my strategy games. And if I was going to play a real-time strategy game set in a popular pop culture sci-fi universe, then my go-to is going to be Star Wars Empire at War to get my fix of those large-scale space battles. In any case, strategy games like Armada might be good on their own right, but they still suffer from the fundamental problem as the Starship combat games in the previous section. They are almost exclusively focused on conflict and war, but instead of battles between 2 opposing ships or a small group of ships, they're about battles between entire fleets of ships, played from the perspective of disembodied fleet admirals issuing orders. So they also carry forward that problem of Starship Operation games where there's a lot less character because the games are played from the point of view not just of the ships, but of the whole fleets, instead of the people who crew and operate those ships. Much like with the first-person shooters I talked about earlier, this game is all about shooting first and asking questions, well, never. It's not exactly a faithful representation of Star Trek's philosophies or ideals. And the violence here might be a bit more thoughtful than in a first-person shooter, depending on how you look at it, but it is now scaled up to galactic proportions, with the player callously and repeatedly blowing up ships full of hundreds or thousands of people with hardly a second thought. There have also been other attempts at large-scale strategy games. There was Star Trek Deep Space Nine Dominion Wars, which tries to kind of bridge the gap between something like Starfleet Command and Armada by offering fleet engagements with the ability to take more direct control over a single starship. This is a game that I wanted to play back when it released, but I never got around to buying it, so I have to go to Let's Plays to figure out how this game works. Dominion War takes place concurrently with Seasons 5 and 6 of the Deep Space Nine TV show. It overlaps considerably with the plotlines of that show, including multiple missions that take place during the events of specific episodes. As such, the TV show is actually doing quite a bit of the heavy lifting for the video game's narrative. though that doesn't stop the mission briefings from dragging on seemingly forever with unnecessary exposition. However, the game lacks all of the character and drama that makes the TV show's final seasons so good. It also doesn't quite hold up on its own merits as a video game, even though a big part of the game's design and marketing is the ability to take more direct control over a single ship. A common complaint that I read about the game, and one that is validated by the Let's Plays that I've watched, is that the strategy is so simplistic that direct control is simply never necessary. As long as you have more ships or bigger ships than the opponent and you don't split up your forces and allow yourself to be overwhelmed, all you have to do is point your fleet in the general direction of the Dominion and let the AI blast away. A bit of a more novel example of a Star Trek strategy game is the pseudo-hybrid city builder New Worlds. I don't think I ever got around to playing this, which is actually kind of surprising, even to myself, because I'm a huge sucker for city building games. I was a huge fan of SimCity 2000 and SimCity 3000 and SimCity 4. I played the hell out of Caesar 4, and I even played city builder adjacent games like The Movies back in the day. And since then, my Steam catalog has always been full of new city builders, ranging from city skylines to medieval city builders like Banished and Settlement Survival, to post-apocalyptic city builders like Surviving the Aftermath and Atomic Society, and even prehistoric city builders like Dawn of Man and Ancient Cities. And my wish list is also full of yet more city builders like Foundation, Farthest Frontier, Land of the Vikings, The Wandering City, and more. But somehow, I never managed to play the Star Trek city builder. I even tried looking to buy it as part of my research for this video, but I didn't find it available on either Steam or Good Old Games, so I'd either have to pirate it or I'd have to track down a secondhand CD that someone is selling on eBay or whatever. But I think the real reason that I never played this game, besides its very poor contemporary reviews, is because it's actually not really that much of a city builder. It's actually closer to a real-time strategy base builder. From what I've seen of the game, it looks much closer to StarCraft than to SimCity. And most of what the player is building end up being resource extractors and military outposts with which to defend those resources and the resource extractors. It's a real damn shame, too, because I think there's actually a lot of potential in a game like New Worlds if it were more interested in being an actual city or colony builder. Focusing on StarCraft, Command & Conquer, and Warcraft as inspirations instead of SimCity or Caesar really does hold this game back, at least in my opinion. From what I can tell from the few Let's Plays that I could find on YouTube, gameplay consists almost entirely of building a few simple base structures, then pumping out a small fleet of hover tanks, pointing them in the general direction of an enemy base, then fighting with the poor controls and camera in order to blow up all the enemy tanks and base structures before they blow up all of yours. A game more about building thriving colonies in a hostile environment would have been way more in line with Star Trek, and could also have included the occasional battle between hover tanks. Sure, why not? City builders like Caesar already had a mission-based campaign in which the player is tasked with building a thriving olive colony, and then on the next mission maybe a trade hub, and then on the next mission maybe a military base. And games since, like Imagine Earth and Surviving Mars, offer similar mission-based challenges, along with the challenge of simply building a colony on a hazardous alien world on which humans don't really belong. I could totally see myself falling in love with a Star Trek game that takes inspiration from the likes of Caesar and SimCity and Imagine Earth, and which tasks the player with building a successful colony on inhospitable alien worlds, and completing tasks like mining for dilithium, or building a farming colony that can feed whole other worlds, or building a starport or shipyard for starships to dock and repair, or maybe even a recreation planet like Ryza, at which tired starship crews take shore leave. And sure, maybe you can also have to occasionally fight off attacks by Klingons, Orion pirates, or a Borg cube threatening to assimilate your little colony. But, of course, if any devs out there want to try their hand at an actual Star Trek-themed city builder, as opposed to an RTS with light city-building mechanics, you will probably get my money. There was also another ground-based strategy game called Away Team, which looks to be closer to something like XCOM. It was also poorly reviewed at the time, and so I never actually got around to play it. It's yet another Star Trek game that is almost solely focused around phaser fights. But at least this one takes those phaser fights back down to a character level, where there is at least the potential for there to be interesting character dynamics. I mean, a game like XCOM, with its procedurally generated characters and the very real risk and likelihood, and in fact almost certainty, that some of those characters will die over the course of the campaign, means that the player can actually form organic or emergent connections and relationships with those characters, and then their death or noble sacrifices can be that much more meaningful. Much like New Worlds, Away Team does not live up to its potential either. I mean, the name of our hero ship in this game is the USS Incursion, which probably has to be the most un-Starfleet name for a ship that I've ever heard. There was also a game on consoles called Star Trek Conquest, which, well, the name pretty much says it all. It's another war-driven pseudo-strategy game about large fleet engagements. This one, being on consoles, is of course a much more simple and arcadey affair than either Armada or Dominion Wars. In fact, it's even more arcadey than the likes of Legacy. It allows the player to take control over any ship in your fleet and engage in that same dual-stick shooter gameplay as the aforementioned Star Trek encounters, but a lot simpler and less fun. Players play as one of the 6 different factions, and they engage in fleet battles over planets on a galactic map in an attempt to control the entire map. It's basically a cheap, hastily put together, bargain bin, console wannabe Star Wars Empire at War. Its arcadey nature, its bargain bin price tag, and its relatively short playtime, as well as the replayability of having 6 factions, might have made it a mildly entertaining, if not kind of childish, so-called strategy game, if not for how absolutely broken and exploitable its arcade battles are. You can just strafe around the edges of the map and fire at enemies off-screen who won't even be able to shoot back at you because they cannot fire at you while they are off-screen. And you can win almost every single battle by using this method, even if you are statistically outnumbered and highly outgunned. And it's also not even as replayable as it might initially appear. The map is the same every time you play, no matter how many factions are in the game. Aside from their start positions on the map and the fact that they have different combinations of super weapons, the individual factions aren't even all that different or specialized from one another. For example, there's no concept of a cloaking device in this game, so the Romulans' and Klingons' most significant tactical advantage is just simply absent. More importantly, this game completely misses the point of Star Trek. There is nothing to do but fight. There's no exploration because the map is the same every time. There's no colonization or colony building. All the resource exploitation and research is used exclusively for combat. There are NPC minor factions, but they are just there for you to shoot and kill on your way to get to the borders with the major factions, so there's no trade or diplomacy either. And every faction even has a selection of super weapons that they can periodically deploy in order to break a stalemate, kind of like turning in a set of cards in Risk. This is a game that lets the Federation casually and repeatedly deploy the Genesis device in order to wipe out entire enemy fleets, although you don't actually get to use it to, destroy or recreate planets the way that it would actually be used. So, it's not even authentic. And, okay, I'm sorry to harp on this low-budget bargain bin game so much, and honestly, I did not initially intend to do so when I started outlining the script. I was just going to say, 1 or 2 sentences about it. But I noticed that the PS2 version of this game has an 86 overall user score on Metacritic. So I just had to put the extra playtime into this game to figure out how. Is there something that I missed that makes this game a hidden, unappreciated gem like Legacy turned out to be? Sure, it's only 16 people who gave it scores, but this is the second highest user score of any Star Trek game that I've looked at on Metacritic. It's higher than Resurgence, it's higher than Elite Force, it's higher than Armada or Starfleet Command or Invasion. Hell, it's a higher user score than Star Wars Empire at War. I kind of feel obligated to review this game and score this game myself so as to drag its score down to something more realistic. But thankfully, the Star Trek game that actually does have the highest user review score on Metacritic is a game that actually deserves that high score. Sort of. And now we get to what I consider to be the good stuff. I get to finally talk about what is my personal favorite Star Trek video game of all time. And apparently I'm not the only one who considers this to be their favorite, because this next game is the only Star Trek game that I found that has a higher Metacritic score than Conquest. That game is Birth of the Federation. Birth of the Federation is basically a Star Trek reskin of Master of Orion 2. I mean, it's not basically a reskin, it is a Star Trek reskin of Master of Orion 2. It was developed by the same studio, Microprose. It's a turn-based 4X strategy game in which the player chooses one of 5 factions and proceeds to explore a procedurally generated galaxy, colonize new planets and expand your borders and acquire resources, construct infrastructure on those planets, conduct diplomacy and trade with the other 4 factions and with other independent, non-playable factions, and probably, eventually, at some point in the game, engage in warfare with those other factions for ultimate control of the galaxy. It's basically Civilization, but Star Trek. Though I love this game and have very fond memories of it and even come back to it from time to time, I will freely confess that it is not the best game in its own right. It's a game that also got mixed or middling reviews at the time that it was released, largely because of poor AI, which has to blatantly cheat in order to remain competitive, and also because of poor performance. The game has a crippling memory leak, which slows it down to a snail's pace after just about 120 turns, regardless of your system specs. And that's assuming that it doesn't just crash, which it was prone to doing. And even on modern high-end systems, Birth of the Federation has a consistent cursor lag that makes it very difficult to play this game, unless maybe you're playing it on a touchscreen. Nevertheless, this is another Star Trek game that has retained a bit of a cult following despite its flaws and mediocre reviews, and there's even been attempts by its community to create unofficial sequels, which, as far as I know, have all been abandoned before any of them were ever fully implemented. I don't know if there were maybe like cease and desist or other legal actions taken against them. While those point-and-clicks are great at capturing the human element of Star Trek and the occasional scientific and engineering problem-solving, the 4X or grand strategy genre is great at capturing another popular aspect of the show. You know, the part that's in the title and in the opening monologue.
Space, a final frontier.
These are the continuing voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Her ongoing mission:
to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go
Where no man, where no one has gone before.
While a 4X game like Birth of the Federation doesn't necessarily capture the more awe-inspiring aspects of exploration the way that, say, Outer Wilds does, it is still, at the end of the day, a game entirely about boldly reaching out into the unknown and exploring the galaxy. And Outer Wilds is, by the way, one of my favorite games ever, and I'm actually going to give it an honorable mention in this video right now by being, in my opinion, the best Star Trek video game that does not have the words Star Trek in its title. Remember earlier when I was talking about Elite Force not being able to license the Voyager theme music, and that for some people, simply having sound effects and music from the show is enough to make the game feel like Star Trek? No, that's not how you feel like Star Trek. A game or any creative work feels like Star Trek if it understands and shares the core philosophy and morality of Star Trek. Outer Wilds is a game entirely about exploring strange new worlds, seeking out new life and new civilizations. Although in this case, it's actually ancient life and extinct civilizations, but, technicalities. And it's about boldly going where no Parthian has ever gone before. This game absolutely nails the idea of beaming down to a mysterious alien planet, pulling out that tricorder, and solving its mysteries. And all of this exploration and puzzle solving, which all uses pseudo-realistic physics concepts and science, is in service of a humanist story about how valuable each one of our lives are, despite our apparent insignificance at the grand cosmic scale. Outer Wilds is about our place in the universe and how we find meaning for our lives in the things that we do and the people that we meet in the limited time that we're here. As Carl Sagan once so eloquently put it,
because the cosmos is also within us. We're made of star stuff. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself. The journey for each of us begins here. We're going to explore the cosmos in a ship of the imagination, unfettered by ordinary limits on speed and size, drawn by the music of cosmic harmonies. It can take us anywhere in space and time.
I don't know if the developers at Mobius Digital are Trekkies, but as far as I'm concerned, those folks get Star Trek better than most of the development studios who have ever actually made Star Trek games. Anybody looking to make a Star Trek video game should take a good, hard look at Outer Wilds and what makes that game work, because it is just absolutely beautiful. Anyway, I'm supposed to be talking about Birth of the Federation. The counterpoint, of course, is that all of the exploration, diplomacy, and trade in Birth of the Federation is in service of galactic conquest, which isn't exactly in line with the benevolent ideals of Star Trek. The most direct path to victory is to eliminate all the other rival factions by conquering their homeworlds, though there are also victory conditions that simply require controlling a majority of the map's population and territory, and it is also possible for more than one faction to win the game if they are allied together, although the population territory requirements are then higher for such a joint victory. So it is possible to win the game without being openly aggressive against the other factions, which is in better keeping with Star Trek's philosophies and ideals. Oh, and Birth of the Federation, by the way, actually does make the Borg into the most dangerous adversaries you can fight in the game. In fact, it does so to the point of arguably being unfair and broken.
You will lower your shields and prepare to be boarded. Resistance is futile.
A single Borg cube can obliterate an entire fleet unless that fleet happens to be cloaked and gets off a successful first strike. The Borg can completely wipe out entire empires off of the map. I've even won games of Birth of the Federation because the Borg destroyed all of my rivals for me. It is so unfair, in fact, that the unofficial community patch adds an option to just turn them off. Even though there were future sequels to Master of Orion, although we can argue about whether they were any good or not, Microprose never did get around to creating a sequel or spiritual successor to Birth of the Federation. And there has not been a really proper, full-fledged 4X Star Trek game since. Or at least not until very recently. In October of 2023, Paradox released Star Trek Infinite, which is the other game besides Resurgence, which served as the primary inspiration for me creating this video topic to begin with. Infinite is a real-time 4X strategy game built on the Stellaris engine. In fact, just like with Birth of the Federation, it's not just built on the same engine, it is just a Star Trek reskin of Stellaris. And just like Birth of the Federation, it is set in the Next Generation era. It also only has 4 factions: the Federation, Klingons, Romulan, Cardassians. No Ferengi this time around. It's limited in scope, and it doesn't quite scratch the same itch that Birth of the Federation left. At least not for me. In fact, the game that does come closest to scratching that particular itch, and to being the closest thing to a spiritual successor to Birth of the Federation, is actually a tabletop board game called Star Trek Ascendancy. Ascendancy is a great game. It's probably my favorite board game at the time of recording this. Even my friends who are not Star Trek fans really enjoy playing Ascendancy, and they are perfectly willing and happy to spend the 5 or more hours that it takes to play a game whenever we all have a day off at the same time, which is hard to do because I live in Las Vegas, where everybody has irregular schedules and works nights and weekends and swing shifts and stuff like that. Ascendancy's core set includes the Federation, Klingons, and Romulans as playable factions. In the first 3 expansions, added the Cardassians and Ferengi as playable factions, and the Borg as an NPC faction, which exactly duplicated the faction roster of Birth of the Federation. For a couple years, this was the roster that we were playing in the game, and this was basically Birth of the Federation, the board game. Since then, there have been a few additional expansions that included the Vulcans, Andorians, Breen, and Dominion, all as playable factions, though still no Tholians, despite there being that one event card in the core set that has been referencing a hypothetical Tholian player since the game released. Ascendancy manages to make some thematic improvements over Birth of the Federation. For one thing, it promotes and rewards exploration by allowing players to conduct scientific study on phenomena on the map, which provides extra research points that can be used to upgrade combat abilities or learn technologies that grant powerful abilities, so you have something to do with your ships other than to just send them into battle. The game's actual namesake, Ascendancy, refers to a mechanic whereby each faction can gain culture points, which they can use to ascend to a higher level of culture and eventually, potentially, win a non-violent culture victory. Each faction in this board game has a set of unique abilities, including buffs and penalties. The Federation, for instance, gets bonuses to diplomatic dice rolls and bonuses towards exploration, but their prime directive prevents them from invading alien worlds or colonizing worlds inhabited by pre-warp civilizations. The Klingons have powerful combat abilities, but their strict code of honor prevents the Klingon player from ever retreating or surrendering in a battle. The Romulans start the game with a cloaking device that gives all of their ships a first strike in space battles, but their suspicious nature makes their trade agreements with other players less profitable. On the other end of the spectrum, the Ferengi are incapable of producing their own culture and must buy their culture tokens with production, but they generate shit tons of production from cooperation and trade with other players.
We're not just doing this for money. We're doing it for a shitload of money.
And the Vulcan player is, by rule, prohibited from ever lying to the other players. Although it's interesting to note that the Vulcan rulebook does not actually include any rules for how this is supposed to work, nor does it include any enforcement mechanisms for if the Vulcan player is caught telling a lie.
You lied.
I exaggerated.
So, I guess it's just up to the players to figure out how to resolve that kind of situation. But whatever. I mean, they still make the effort to make each of these factions really thematic and interesting and unique to play. So each faction plays very differently, and every one of them is fun to play in their own regard and in different ways. But I digress. I'm supposed to be talking about video games. It's just that I really love Star Trek Ascendancy, so I wanted to bring it up any chance I get. I don't have any sales figures for this board game, but the fact that it has spawned 7 expansions, and possibly still counting, suggests that it has sold well and been a success for its publisher Gale Force 9. And it being featured in an episode of South Park has probably also helped immensely. The fact that a Star Trek board game has seen that level of success, I think, is a testament to how well the 4X or grand strategy genre fits with Star Trek as a theme. Oh, and there's also a second edition of the game being crowdfunded on Kickstarter right now, which is going to revise many rules and introduce new factions and expansion mechanics. It's even finally giving us that missing Tholian faction that has been referenced by an event card since the game released almost a decade ago, but which has not been in the actual game yet. So this game is still very alive and doing very well, which is far more than I can say for Star Wars X-Wing and Star Wars Armada, which are a couple of my other favorite tabletop games. It's just a fantastic game. If you're a Star Trek fan and you like board games and you can get 2 or 3 other people to sit down for that amount of time to play a tabletop board game, do yourself a favor and pick up Star Trek Ascendancy. It's just a fantastic game. Just like with the Ascendancy board game, the video game Star Trek Infinite one-ups Birth of the Federation in a few ways. In Birth of the Federation, spatial anomalies and nebulae are just obstacles for your ships to navigate around. But Infinite has more robust mechanics for scanning and studying planets and spatial phenomena. Every planet needs to be surveyed by a science ship in order to determine what resources it has available prior to colonizing it. And studying certain spatial phenomena can provide research points into different fields of scientific study. And during the process of surveying a planet or scanning a phenomenon, you can actually trigger little random events that could provide risks and reward. Just like with the exploration cards of the Ascendancy board game, these random events are inspired by episodes of the TV series. These mechanics do a much better job compared to Birth of the Federation of representing the whole exploring strange new worlds thing that is such a big deal in the TV show's opening monologue. And as far as seeking out new life and new civilizations, Infinite includes a little first contact minigame of sorts, in which the player must send envoys to an independent civilization in order to learn their language and establish formal contact. Establishing peaceful relations with a newly met civilization thus requires actual work from the player and an investment in resources. This helps a faction like the Federation play a bit differently than the other factions. The Federation's extra envoys allow them to make first contact more efficiently, while a faction with fewer envoys at their disposal, like the Klingons or Cardassians, will be more likely to just invade and conquer an independent civilization rather than spend the time and resources needed to establish proper diplomatic channels. Anyway, when Star Trek Infinite was first announced, I incorrectly assumed and hoped that it would just be an official version of Stellaris' popular New Horizons mod. That mod is a total conversion mod that actually covers the whole history of Star Trek. When I played it a few years ago, it started in the 22nd century with the NX-01 prototypes from Enterprise, then progressed into the original series, followed by the movie time period and so-called Lost era, before finally transitioning into the Next Generation era and beyond. And I think since I stopped playing it years ago, they've since added content from Discovery, and maybe at this point also content from Strange New Worlds and maybe also Lower Decks, and maybe even Picard, I don't know. Between New Horizons and Infinite, I kind of feel like I would recommend the New Horizons mod just because of the fact that it covers that wider breadth of Star Trek history, and it's also got a lot more playable factions, and it's just a bigger, more robust game than Infinite, whereas Infinite is a lot more constrained in its scope. Unfortunately, the publisher Paradox Interactive seems to have knowingly and deliberately murdered Star Trek Infinite by rushing it out before it was quite ready, presumably in order to offset some of the losses that it suffered from the financial flop that was Lamplighters League. Infinite released with a slew of bugs, balance, and pacing issues, and just wasn't quite the game that many Trekkies were hoping for, especially in comparison to that New Horizons mod, which was a much more robust and feature-complete product. Infinite's lackluster reception and low sales led to massive layoffs at its development studio, and the cancellation of any future updates or DLC. So this game will never get DLCs to add original series content or other playable factions like the Ferengi or the Dominion. If Star Trek Infinite does see any updates, they'll likely have to come from mods or other community content, if anybody in the community even cares or bothers enough to make content for this game, as opposed to just going back to playing Stellaris with the New Horizons mod. I don't know, maybe the makers of Stellaris' New Horizons mod will port some of their mod content over to Infinite. I don't know, I mean, that might be cool, but only time will tell. If you are curious to hear more of my thoughts on Star Trek Infinite, then in addition to the full written review that I have on my personal blog, I also have done a series of partial playthroughs on my sister playthrough channel, megabearsfan_plays. The first episode of each campaign that I played is available to everybody for free, but subsequent episodes are exclusive only to patrons. So if you want to see that and hear my commentary about both the game and Star Trek in general and video games in general, then please consider contributing to Patreon. My sincere thanks to all patrons, past, present, and future. You really do help to offset the costs of all the editing software that I use to put this content together, and your support is very much appreciated.